everybody. Introduce yourself real quick, just real fast. People know the other voice.
Hello, everybody. My name is A.G. Charlton, aka Lord Motley, author who's a good friend of Drog.
So, you might have heard I'm making a critter game. I've said so. You also might have heard Nintendo is suing Palworld for making a critter game. Now, something that I find very funny about this is me making this critter game was entirely inspired by the rage I felt at the creative bankruptcy in some of the Palworld designs. Now, some of them are good. I've seen the statement by the artist who left talking about he hates how his good concept art was turned into a horrible chimera of public domain models and ripped Pokemon models. Obviously, a good creative who puts work into a good design isn't gonna like that, but seriously, my hatred for Palworld being a artless money-making machine that doesn't give a shit about creative integrity is what inspired this. So you might think I'm on Nintendo's side. No, Nintendo sucks in this. They retroactively patented the idea of a Pokeball as a device that you throw to capture creatures to be able to sue Palworld. That's fucked up. It is bad for gaming and it's bad for creativity. I don't know how you feel about this, Mr. Charlton. For my money, the way I see it is, I think that creative works build off each other. They take inspiration from each other. Gaming especially is built from the idea of taking inspiration from a thing that you like or have played or experienced and saying, what if it had traits of another thing I like and then traits of this other thing I've liked, played, and experienced? That's gaming to me. How do you feel about that?
So I think personally one of the best examples of that is Souls-likes.
Yes.
Almost every Souls-like is so aggressively similar to Dark Souls.
Aggressively FromSoft coded. Like, they are so Dark Souls.
And despite that, they're beloved. And the same would go for like roguelikes.
Yeah.
These are genres that have been created by a mechanic that people liked.
Now, this is not the same thing as like Middle-earth people being like the Nemesis system is copywritten, which is also done because that could be such a cool system that other people could build on. But now there's this giant territory of adjacent mechanics that people can't build with now because they might get sued for building something similar. And the Nemesis system, while cool, it doesn't actually help them to make people not build off of it. It's not better that they can't. It doesn't make it be more profitable for their game that other people can't use that system. There's no benefit. It's dumb. It's against creativity. So where are my thoughts if I feel like rip-offs without heart are bad, and so is suing people for the sake of it and trying to make gaming not be able to be iterative? Well, I think that things should be iterative, be inspired by something, but have their own creative heart. Critical Crits is that. I don't think we're in a ton of trouble, but I'll talk about my philosophy of making the game real quick. I love critter games. I think they're great. I think it sucks that it feels like a lot of new critter games love the critters and don't love the game. I love Pokemon's mechanics. I think they're super cool, but I think there's room to reimagine them, refresh them, be more interesting by expanding on it. I love tabletop RPGs. A lot of this channel is going to be about that, which is why I'm bringing tabletop RPG elements in and adding it with my critter game. Big idea immediately, as you can see, we have familiars, hobgoblins, and a little summoner mage as our main character. So that's kind of how I see creativity. Now, is this critter game going to need major changes from its current development? No. Frankly, this is going to sound incredibly dumb with what I've said earlier, but I promise it'll make sense. I think it's lazy and bad that Palworld basically just made Pokeballs be their capture mechanic. However, I also don't think they should get sued for stealing Pokeballs. I think trying to make iteration... Andrew, does this make sense? Do I make sense?
No, I agree, because like Geiger said, imagine if FromSoft tried to retroactively patent Estus flasks.
Yeah.
It's okay if your idea sucks a bit. Do you know what I mean? You shouldn't be sued for being a bit lazy.
I think it is a bit lazy to just be like, fuck it, it's Pokemon with guns, you throw orbs to catch them. You would be more honest if their capture mechanic was just chaining down the Palmons. Honestly, it would. But like...
Yeah, I was just going to say, why not make it handcuffs?
Want to make it handcuffs or something interesting. So immediately I didn't do what Palworld did. With this game, I've actually come up with an entire lore around how we're catching critters. So this is why we're not going to get sued. This is why I'm not worried, at least for this patent. We'll see if Pokemon tries to make creature capture games patented. I doubt they'll succeed at that if they do. So if we scroll through the summoner characters in our cast, you'll notice these giant big old blocky gloves on their hands, right? They got these big blocky gloves and they have a little pipe running down to a thing on their chest. So this is a commonality we have between all the summoner characters. If you see a character without that, they're not a summoner. If you see a character with that, they are a summoner. So I'll talk about the lore behind this. In my setting, there's a thing called spiritual decay. Little bits of magic are everywhere and they distort non-living things. So there's not complex enchantments and there's not complex machinery. So things tend to be a little bit of both and they look janky. Why is that? I like janky shit and I like Magitech. So we've made a world that allows that. The crit catcher, which is what these gauntlets are called because my sister came up with it because she's good at naming stuff. The crit catcher is a gauntlet that can store a critter in each of the fingers of the glove. So it can store one finger in each of the fingers of the glove. So you get, one critter. Why did I say finger? I guess it stores a finger too. It's a glove. It can store one critter in each finger of the glove. So you have a party of 5. 5 fingers, 5 critters. Exactly. Then it connects to a power supply. The magic crystal on the chest is funneling magic in. It can just rest a bit more stably, and it's not as likely to be attacked if it's resting on your chest. Funnels magic power as a power source to keep the glove running. And instead of like a box like Pokemon, because you can't have computers in this world because they break apart from spiritual decay, there is a magical connection to a being called the Aeon of Possibility. It's lore stuff. You'll care about it when game theory does a thing about it. Basically, all your critters that you catch that aren't used for battle are stored in this crystal on the back of the hand. Simply put, you get spells that come out of this gauntlet, one called Bond, where you offer a partnership of friendship that's got unique capture mechanics that I don't want to spoil just yet because I want to flesh them out a little bit more. Bond is basically making friends with the critter, and then you've got the much more likely to succeed Bind that works better when critters have status debuffs and are at low health, where you force the critter to be your slave, bind it against its will. Bind can also be used as you knock out a critter, and if it fails to capture as it's being knocked out in reaction, a little text will come up that says you killed that critter or it died. Well, it'll work out exactly what it says. The point is,
knocked out.
No, kill. You knock it out by default, and you accidentally kill it if you try to bind in response with a really high catch rate and fail. The idea here being, I want there to be like a really basic little ethical choice of, do you want to befriend your critter or do you want to see them as servants? If you offer a bond, you can feel like they're your partners. And if you just want maximum efficacy, as you knock something out, you can try to bind it. If you fail, you might kill it, but you have a really high chance of binding it. But you can never increase your friendship with something you've bound to your will. I think it's a fun mechanic. And I think it also mechanically separates us a lot from what Pokemon does, so we don't have an issue. If I don't want to rip off Pokemon, why am I making a critter game? Simple. I like creatures. I like little guys. I like these little dudes that you can interact with. And I think the mechanical complexity in Pokemon is really underrated. I think it's a super fun game. I'm not going to tell you Cassette Beasts and Temtem don't look great, but having looked into it, it feels like mechanically the developers didn't appreciate what Pokemon's capable of. Like, it feels like there's a little less love in the math than there is in Pokemon. I want a game that loves its math. I want a game that loves the battle system. I want a game that loves what you can do with this genre. And that's what this is going to be. But because this is meant to be a love letter to things I love, I also am not just going to copy Pokeballs like Palworld does.
So one thing I wanted to ask real quick is, and this isn't so much related to Pokeballs, but do you have any plans to allow, because something I've always thought is like, hey, a Pidgey is just a little guy. I could step on a Pidgey. So why can't I throw hands with Pokemon?
I'm going to say yes and no. There is. This little dude you play as isn't going to throw hands, but the reason I'm not going to talk about that in detail is I actually want that to be a secret mechanic. This will be in the YouTube video. If you think that secret mechanic's interesting, play the game. It'll be fun. I have a fun little unlock system for it. It's going to be cool. There will be a way to fight yourself, but this little guy's not going to do it. He's scared of throwing hands.
Because I noticed, like, you know, a lot of the other trainers or catchers are carrying, like, the girl next to him has a sword. She's
throwing hands. She's getting in there. The concept of this character is she's a jack of all trades instead of a prodigal summoner like you are. She didn't even get proper training. She trained herself how to summon. She can only control one critter at a time while you control 2. So she gets in beside casting spells and hitting with swords right beside her critter.
Like, I've just always thought there are so many Pokemon I could beat up with a baseball bat.
There's fewer that you could beat up in this game. Maybe because basic attacks are a thing in this game. I think it would actually make sense to give your character very basic attacks you can use if you're dragged into combat. My idea is anytime you have only one critter in combat, you don't have enough to protect yourself with and you get dragged in and can be targeted. So maybe I will give you the option to actually throw hands when you're down to just you so that you have the option of defending yourself against a Pidgey.
You know what could be a really fun idea to deal with the fact that he doesn't really want to fight?
Yeah.
Is give your character weapons and like let them buy weapons that aren't really weapons, they're self-defense tools. So like buy a taser. I'm not
going to do that specifically just because something that I really want to do, and this is a bit of a spoiler for some mechanics I want to touch on. We'll get into some mechanics that I haven't talked about before. Why not? This is a video about Palworld. We can talk about how our capture is different. I want your character, and it won't indicate this clearly, like this is something something you'll have to discover. Your character will show up in your party screen. It'll be 5 critters and then you. Index and thumb first. Those will be the critters you send to the back line and front line. And then it'll show your character in the party menu as well. And you can equip the same items to you that you can the critters. And some of them will give you modifiers on your catch rate. So for instance, if you equip the item that would normally change a typeless critter into a water type critter, it'll change you into water types, that if you're hit, water type is how you interact defensively. But also it'll make your bond more effective against water type critters and your bind more effective against critters weak to water.
I dig it.
Which is the only reason I'm not giving like bear spray, but honestly, that does sound funny.
Yeah, I just imagine like using bear spray, it gives you a better chance to flee the battle.
Oh, holy shit. Wait, as a consumable, that's actually a really good idea. I think the exploration mechanics, I've talked a bit about this. I think the exploration mechanics, I want to be all critter based. I think getting rid of HMs instead of improving HMs was a mistake. I think making them something that doesn't require wasting a move slot would have been smarter. Pokemon until Scarlet and Violet did a really bad job for a long time of making you feel like your Pokemon were connected to the world. The overworld and the battle and the party were all entirely different. Whereas up until Gen 6, when HM still existed, the party, the battle screen, and the overworld had this through line of HMs, and I kind of want to bring that back. So exploration mechanics, I want to be critter based. I think that's a lot more fun. I think having a connection between those elements is just better gameplay. Wasting a move slot was bad, so I have my own way of doing that. Not going to get into the details here, but there is an idea I have that'll save on development time.
What we're talking about here today, though, is the idea of
capture,
creative capture and creative integrity.
Oh, absolutely.
And I do agree with you. Palworld, garbage.
Yeah, and having looked up that thing by the person who left their team, there were designers on board who cared about what they were doing. Some of the designs are decent, but the motivation was not to make a piece of art that people cared about.
It was to make a game that would sell based on hype.
Yeah, hype and the bit that this is another franchise plus something else. It's Pokemon plus guns plus Arc. I would be dishonest to say Pokemon wasn't the inspiration for making this game, but it's less the inspiration in that I want to make Pokemon but for me, and more like I feel as though I haven't seen someone who feels the way about Pokemon I do make a critter game. Like, the genre feels kind of trapped, and I want to iterate on this concept in a unique way. I want to push this concept into new territory.
And yeah, like you know, I'm an author, and like I don't try and pretend my book wasn't inspired by the fantasy novels I love. Some of the characters in my book are specifically inspired by characters I like, but they aren't just that character. They are my spin on that character's archetype, and that's what Critical Crits is. It's your spin on the idea of a creature capture archetypal game.
Exactly. It's meant to be this archetype pushed in its own direction and just have some fresh life breathed in it. I'll say, honestly, while Temtem's designs I like more, I think Cassette Beast did a better job at feeling like a passionate love letter, and both of them were a love letter for the designs. Cassette Beast also felt like a love letter for how collecting works in Pokemon. It, like, definitely whoever was in charge of lead development loves the idea of collecting Pokemon, which is something I'm inspired by, but neither of them feel like they're in love with the battle system. I think our battle system, if we can make it work the way I'm envisioning, is going to be something fantastic, and I'm so excited for people to see this spin on the genre, because it's going to be very fresh if we can make it work.
And admittedly, like, what turns me off of Pokemon is that I'm a mechanically minded, grindy person who likes dense combat systems. And guess what none of these games have?
Well, what I find interesting about Pokemon is that I think it's actually really held back by its target audience, because Pokemon, if you look at the competitive scene, is incredibly mechanically nuanced, but there is no expectation or need to interact with that complexity in the main game, so the main game doesn't even communicate that it's complex to you.
Yeah, and like I used to be quite into Pokemon, but I want games to challenge me, and Pokemon does not challenge you. The competitive scene might, but normal Pokemon will not. Single-player
Pokemon is unchallenging, and granted, I have said this before, it's challenging to kids, it's a kid's game, it's fine, it's unchallenging, but there's a reason people like you aren't going to enjoy it the same way. So much of the depth and interest to it is something that is intentionally obfuscated. Like, when you tell people that you can customize your Pokemon stats, they don't understand that, which is why our level up system is Dark Souls inspired, where you can exactly pick how to level up your stats as you go, and that is the level up. The level up system is EVs from Pokemon, but a bit exaggerated, instead of it being a hidden mechanic that you have to understand these special items and that you get a tiny bit of stat that you can't see unless you press the right button on the right menu, and then you don't see a numerical representation, you see a little star graph representing what you just knocked out. Like, it's so opaque that...
I hate mechanical obfuscation. Show me the nuts and bolts.
And that's a huge inspiration for this game. I want a Pokemon that tells you its numbers. Something that I debated for a long time was whether or not the game would tell you damage numbers. And I decided, yes, it will. And my big thinking was, well, but then you could exactly do calcs and people would be inspired to pull out a calculator and try to plug it in when they see how much damage they're attacked. And I went, no, fuck that. The second you hit a critter, the game will log, because it tells you how much damage you did, what the stamina stat and the defensive stat that was used to defend against the attack you used are. And now whenever you're attacking that defense again, the game will show you damage estimates of how much damage you'll do. They'll not be precise because there will be damage rolls, but I think it's actually way better if it's like, why do you have to study calcs? Why do you have to memorize 400 calcs to play competitive Pokemon? Actually, maybe that's not good. Maybe it'd be better if the game does, once you hit somebody, show you the damage estimates.
I mean, just like look at any kind of CRPG. And this is, this game is taking some Dark Souls inspiration, some CRPG inspiration.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I want to open combat log and see my D20 roll and my critical hit and the numbers behind my critical hit.
Absolutely.
Because as Zeke said, it enables me to make informed decisions about building my character. And that's a good thing. You should want your players to feel empowered in how they design their party and their team.
It's a reason that I think Pokemon is actually really held back by its target audience, like genuinely.
I agree.
Because the people who designed the numerical system and the combat in Pokemon clearly love video games. They've developed an incredibly complex, interesting system that is brilliantly deep, but for the sake of the target audience, it is only ever pitched on its most surface level. The way that a player who doesn't want to do external research interacts with the game sees it as something incredibly simple. And that's a real shame. So the idea of making a game that, while mechanically will be very different from Pokemon, is in the same genre and inspired by it, is so forward with its mechanics and incredibly transparent, I think has a lot of potential to bring something fresh to this.
And yeah, like at the end of the day, the core of it is like what's really capturing me on this over any other creature capture game is just your clear love. And like you said, there are people at Game Freak who clearly love video games and who clearly love a complex, dense system, but that isn't allowed to show through in their games.
Like,
and
if they didn't love the complex system, then competitive Pokemon wouldn't require you to memorize 400 calcs.
But like, because they're marketing it towards children, they can't show that information front end because that would scare away the kids.
Exactly.
Watching you work on these is making me want to propose my own trainer, Sona.
Do you want to show up? I'll make a Saturday stream where it's you designing a character. I would love to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to use this news as an opportunity to talk about like why I love this genre and why, because we're coming at it from an angle of wanting to create something creatively fresh, I don't really think a lawsuit's possible, because at every opportunity I'm looking for how our setting tells the story of a creature capture game. At every angle I'm trying to find what can be different. Types is one of the only things I felt like I've kept directly from Pokemon because it's one of their best decisions. Even how we're approaching what Pokemon calls evolution, what we're calling progression, is very different. And that's just there because, let's be frank, form changes are sick as fuck. It's really fun.
Yeah. And look, Pokemon can't sue you for that because Digimon's been doing it for the same amount of time. If they and if they did, they'd have to sue Digimon too.
Digimon actually, I think, might have started first in Japan because it was a Tamagotchi.
Form changes and creature types, those are both, well, like creature type, that's again a TTRPG thing as much as it is a Pokemon thing.
Math is a little bit more Pokemon-like, but honestly, Pokemon did good math.
Form changes, just cool.
As someone who knows the real Digimon versus Pokemon lore, let's be frank. Digimon, as the anime made it, is a Pokemon ripoff. Digimon, the base concept, came first. Oh, I actually want to go back to something because I realized something you said there. When you were talking about designing your own trainer, that's one of the big ways that I departed. I wanted to rethink combat in a big way. And because this is a fantasy world where you're playing as a summoner, there's not really generic trainers ever. Summoners are always a named character because it's so rare. The majority of NPCs you fight are going to be like knights or rogues or whatever. And when they have animals with them, it's more likely to be a familiar or a summon or an animal companion, like a temporary summon, not summon or something. It's different. Most of the enemies you fight when they're humans are just going to be like a guy with a sword or things like that, which is, again, to point out that I'm trying to approach this from a very fresh angle, to not feel stuck in the idea that this needs to be a world where everyone's obsessed with creatures. Everyone's a crit summoner and is going out there to capture crits and battle each other, and that's what the entire economy runs on, and yet you only make the equivalent of like $210 real from beating the champion.
No, I really like that. I also just love the idea of you getting JJK style jumped by a pair of knights.
Absolutely possible. Because this game is also inspired by Canadian and American culture of the Pacific Northwest, where I live, because I love the vibe here. One of the characters is an evil knight who's based off of a Mountie, and he's a Dullahan, and I fucking love this guy's design. I think he's great.
I just love how incredibly smug his head looks while he is standing on his head.
Right? I fucking love this guy. I genuinely love him. He's gonna be dating the main villain, and this is the two of them side by side while he's on his mount.
Hell yeah.
I love this vibe. I love it. Maybe this will be in the video because these guys fucking rule. I love this guy. He's a Mountie knight. You gotta love it.
I do love that they have such distinctly different vibes.
Yeah. A couple doesn't need to be the same. They're also both immortal because one's a Dullahan and one's an elf, so they're like a similar age, which is cool. Please Team Rocket them. No, we're not Team Rocketing them. This woman's a real fucking threat. I don't want to spoil the story, so I'm not going to get into what she does, but she is willing to burn down towns to get her way. She is a genuine threat. This guy's motivation is to start a war. Like, these people are real bastards. They are going to cause problems. They are real fucking issues. If you enjoy this, if you think this is a cool idea, I'm going to be designing critters for this, characters for this, doing art assets, all the like, world building even, all on stream, not all on stream. I'm going to have to work offline sometimes, but a lot of it's being done on stream. Chat's been so helpful with designs. It's been incredible. We have so many critters to go through, so many characters. If you like it at all, join Twitch, link in the description, hang out with us, be part of the process. I am loving working with people on this. It's been the most fun. Some chatters have been welcomed on stream to chat with me while I'm working. And I'm going to leave the comments with a question. Of our world bosses, this game's equivalent to gym leaders, but different because, again, I don't like repeating ideas. Which one is your favorite? We got 5 world bosses who give you your test to become licensed as the full summoner by the end of the game. Personally, I think my favorite is either number 1 or number 3. I'm a big fan of both of them.
I like number 3 because he reminds me of Maui, and number 5 because that looks like a Dark Eldar fashion lord.
Honestly, kind of. His whole thing is he's a vampire who is on the outskirts of society and doesn't really care about what's going on.
You know, in terms of an individual art piece, I'm going to say number 4 because I love the motion inherent in how you've done the motion lines.
Fair. A quick thing I'll mention, I don't know if this will be in the edit, editor chooses. Each of these designs is meant to be a mix of a genre of music and a fantasy archetype. So I'm trying to sell a fantasy archetype of shape language with the outfit associated with a genre of music. So she's grunge and ranger, which is why she has a bodice, because it's you'd wear that both for grunge and as a ranger. She's got her loose flannel as a loose overcloak. She's got a skirt because people do that pretty often. Agreed on 4. Looking respectfully at all of them. Guy with the checkered pants is a mix of a bard and ska, which is why he has a fedora. It's why he has the checkered pants. He's got a collared shirt with a giant collar. I really like that mix. This guy's
Bard and ska, huh? Yeah, that's the impression that I get from him.
Bard and ska. I mean, yeah.
That was a joke. No, that was a joke.
Oh,
the impression that I get by the Mighty Mighty Bosstones.
Oh my fucking! I forgot that song exists. Now it needs to be in the video. This guy is a mix of a fighter, where he has his collar as big pauldrons and his open chest representing like where that upper plate on a chest plate would be. A mix of a fighter and folk rock, which is why he's just got trousers and suspenders and a tie.
I gotta say, making the collar so big it becomes pauldrons is an inspired choice.
Thank you. I'm so glad you think so. I felt brilliant when I came up with that, to recreate like pauldron shape with a collar. She's meant to be a mix of pop music and like an evil sorceress archetype, which is why she's got, I think that one speaks for itself. I don't have to describe much there.
Yeah, you don't. No, you got it.
Yeah, and he's meant to be evil vampire plus EDM music.
Really? I was going to say glam rock.
I could see glam rock too. I looked up slutty EDM boys to design him.